Today's guest is Benjamin Friedman, who is the president and founder of Build, Scale, Grow. This business helps founders scale efficiently and grow exponentially at a fraction of the cost to hire full-time leaders. In the last 10 years, five of his clients have actually gone through successful mergers and acquisitions transactions. So, Benjamin, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Jessica. I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on as well. So yeah, I'd love for you to just kind of dive into and give us a little bit more context on, what it is that you do and what you're all about.
Sure. So I've been working with startups the last couple decades. In the past, I would come in as a full-time employee. I would typically be the head of operations, the head of finance, or in many startups, I'd really have both roles, even if the title was one or the other. And my first startup was an e-commerce company that doubled in size, both revenues and employees. Each year for 3 years, it got acquired by First Data Corporation, and it's how I got addicted to startups because it was a fantastic ride. I was taking on different responsibilities. I was trying to be thoughtful, but also experimental. I would see what worked, what didn't. I'd adjust. I got a lot of feedback. I made a lot of mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. Thrilling. And so I moved from startup to startup, typically industry agnostic, but coming in, helping them to establish enough infrastructure to reach the next level. Nothing too corporate, but enough that we're getting organized and thinking about how we operate as a company. And a few years ago, I decided to do that on my own. So for the last 4 years, I've been working with a handful of clients at any given time. It can be anywhere from a couple hours a month to 10, 15 hours a week, diving in, really serving as a fractional COO, working across projects like revenue operations, client success, really finding out where are the weaknesses of the company, how do we fill in those gaps and help the company holistically move forward and move to success, hopefully.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, it's like when I'm hearing that, all I'm hearing is kind of like following the breadcrumbs of like where your excitement and like where your success is like leading you, right? Like I got hooked the first time with this, it was very exciting, and then it just kind of building to this thing where you're now kind of doing it in the capacity that sounds like it kind of serves you best. So that's kind of what I heard from the outside looking in. So anything you want to add to that, floor is yours for that.
So that's a great observation. I totally agree. I would add that I found it really important to build the right relationships. So in the past, I took it for granted that if it was an exciting company, if they had an exciting vision, if there were one or two people who worked there who I loved, everything else would work out. Now I'm very mindful and proactive about the founders with whom I'm working, and I will pepper them with questions. I'll get examples. I'll talk with other members of the team before I fully commit. That way, I'm assured that I'm working with people who share my values around learning and positivity and collaboration. Many founders say they want to change, but far fewer founders are actually ready to change. I'm sure I'm getting into your livelihood much more than my experience, but that's what I've discovered, and I've tried to be a little bit more proactive about that.
Yeah, 110%. That's why I was smiling while you were sharing all of that. It's always one of those, like I think there's like the meme, like, who wants to change, and everybody's like putting up their hand, and then like who wants to change now, and it's like nobody's there. It's like an empty room. So yeah, I totally get it. Okay, so yeah, in that case, I'd love to know just, how can I support you today?
So I have found success throughout my career. I've also, of course, been in situations where it didn't turn out the way we wanted. But I'd like to think that at this point, Drasco, I come to the table with lots of experience around what works and what doesn't work. So it's not necessarily that what worked in the past will work again in the future, but I like to think that I have a number of ideas that can really help founders to scale and grow effectively. Now, having said all that, I'm having trouble bridging the gap between my expertise and hopefully my skills and finding the founders who could benefit from those at the same time. Now, I realize that in some cases it's situational. For instance, we're in a period where a lot of founders are having trouble getting funding, they're having trouble expanding, they're really focused on cash flow versus growth. I also realized that no matter how wonderful I might think I am on a great day, somebody else might talk with me and think, oh, that guy's not really going to help out. But somewhere in there is the sense that I have something to offer, but I'm having a hard time finding the people who could value that. And that's where I'm really facing a wall.
Got it. Okay. So given that you've been in so many environments around, founders and people that need to grow and these types of companies, if you were consulting yourself, okay, what would you suggest?
So that's a great question. I started off trying to solve this problem in the traditional sales outreach cadence where I'm just reaching out cold by email and through LinkedIn. I've had zero success through that. Well, I'd say a couple good conversations, but basically, when it comes to results, zero success. I have shifted where I'm trying to catch up with people more one on one. I'm trying to get to more events like I used to before COVID. I have found more success there. Haven't reached the end game of finding new clients yet, but the conversations are much, first of all, they're much more meaningful for me. And second of all, I can see that they're leading in the right direction. So I'm hopeful that that's part of the solution. But then I feel like maybe there's another component that I'm missing, or maybe there's something that I'm not bringing to those conversations that is the difference between talking a lot and starting with some new clients.
Got it. So in this instance, like what is your kind of intuitive or gut feel on what you might be missing?
So my first reaction to that question is I'm not as eager to talk about ways that I could help. I'm not as eager to embrace the call to action, like, hey, let's jump on a call. Like, hey, like, let's solve a problem. Hey, like, let's talk about a statement of work. I'm happy having the conversation, but not, I guess, closing the deal in air quotes. So I would say that comes to mind, and I'll pause there.
Okay, perfect. So what what's your resistance or hesitation towards the call to action or closing the sale?
I think it's hard to imagine. So I tend to be a people pleaser, and I'm sure you hear that all the time. So I almost hate to say it, but I definitely tend to do that. In a lot of ways, that serves me well, right? I'm in a service industry for what I do, and I think that's great. But there are times when I'm hesitant to look at the work relationship as like, hey, we need to move forward. Hey, we need to take that step. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe we'll get closer to uncovering that in our time. But I think that it puts a little more light on it.
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I acknowledge you for, being or allowing yourself to be witnessed in that, right? Because I know it's a vulnerable share. Like, okay, well, generally, I know I have this pattern of people pleasing. It seems to be like affecting me, like in some ways. And like you said, like I know it's not a comfortable thing to do. So, number one, I acknowledge you for sharing that. Number two, I also celebrate you for sharing it because, yeah, this comes up quite often. It comes up in management situations, it comes up in obviously interpersonal situations, and yes, it also comes up in relationship in this instance to money or to sales, right? And especially for somebody who, like, if you're in a COO role, right, you don't necessarily, and I know I'm speaking on your behalf, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not necessarily always closing deals, right? Like you are there to oversee and work on the strategy. So this sounds like it wasn't something that was really needing addressing prior to now. Like, is that accurate?
That's mainly accurate. There are a couple times where I take on the role. I'll come in the meeting, or I'll be doing like a client success and I'm responsible for a potential upsell. But for most part, somebody else is coming in and quote unquote closing the deal. I'm kind of teeing it up.
Got it. Okay. So basically it's you weren't the one that needed to be the one to close the sale. You were in the supporting role for it. So it kind of you never needed to address this as directly as you need to now.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I think the first part before we dive into like the more specifics of it, like right now, just based off of what you shared, like do you really have an outreach getting to the people that need me problem, or do you have more of a closing problem?
That's interesting. Candidly, I'm not sure. I feel like I'm reaching out to dozens of people indirectly and a number of people directly, like depending on the week, like I'll go to events or I'll catch up with people one on one. And all this is while balancing my client work, right? Like there are things that I have to do with work and family, et cetera. So I do feel like I am getting out to people, but I really don't know. Like I know sales is a volume game. If I was doing 5 times as much outreach and just never sleeping, like would that change? Or if I was coming in and with just 1 or 2 people a week, I was saying something magical or something meaningful that had them think, oh, no matter what it takes, I need Benjamin to work with me. That, Jasko, I don't know exactly.
Got it. And then that's fair, right? So I guess this is the part that I just want to explore first because I was taking notes while you were speaking, and the notes that I have on here says like, okay, like I'm not as eager to talk about ways in which I can help. I don't always do the call to action. I don't go into let's solve the problem right away. I don't want to close the sale. So if that's the lens through which your brain is viewing all of these interactions, even on the reach outs, even on the networking, how explicit or direct do you think you are being when this is the lens through which you're approaching all of these instances?
So sorry, is the question, if I'm thinking so much about the sales process, am I being genuine in the interaction?
No, not genuine. I believe your genuineness. I don't think that's question, because like even just how you talk about it and the energy with which you bring to it, it sounds very genuine, and it sounds like you definitely want to help, and excites you to actually help these problems. What I'm getting at is like when I have a business owner that's in front of me and they say something like, I'm not as eager to talk about in ways in which I help, or I'm not as eager to like dive into like a like what's the problem, this I can help you, let's get this problem solved. Like if that is lacking from like when you are describing the general sentiment of how you show up in these situations, then it's kind of like, do you think you have a volume of reach outs problem, or do you think this is actually the part that's screwing up the effectiveness of the reach out you're already doing?
Oh, I see. um, Well, I'll just start talking and I'll see if I get to the answer because the answer doesn't pop in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reaching out to a lot of people. I'm rarely, if it's cold outreach, I'm rarely getting a response. If it's live, it could be a meaningful conversation, but it's not apparent there's any way I could work with them or they know somebody who would be great to talk to. If it does seem like there could be a conversation, I am persistent about, hey, following up and let's find some time to talk. If this week is bad, let's, catch up next week. I am trying to move it forward in a way that's not pushy. Like if it's not clear what I can do, I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to say, let's sign an SOW and figure out later what I'll do. Like, let's just have another conversation and see if I can help you. Um, so I just don't know. I'm not having a lot of those discussions lately. And again, like I can't tell if it's external. I just feel like last year I was having lots of discussions and I was saying no a lot. And this year I'm not even having those discussions. But also I'm wondering like, is there a way either to sort of generate discussions differently where before it kind of came to me, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Now I actually have to tie a lure and go out there and wade in the water. Is that the problem? Or is it, okay, there's a couple bites. I just need to know how to reel it in. Sorry for the analogy for non-fishing fans.
That's okay. No, nothing to apologize about. It's a beautiful analogy. And I think the part that I would want to stress here, or like specify here is I'm not at all denying the need for the volume, right? Like especially if that's going to be like outreach is going to be my thing. 110% volume is always going to be a factor. So I agree with you on that. I think it's necessary, etc. Like, I think my discussion is more about, because it's like if you came to me and you're saying, okay, I know I should do this, but I don't, that would be a question of exploration. But since you're already doing that, it's like the action's already there. Yeah, could you do more of it? Sure. But like you said, I'm going to spend 24 hours a day just reaching out to people, right? So I think as far as like this discussion, we can put that aside because I think we're both on the same page that, yeah, more volume would obviously be more, discussions and opportunities. This is more about, okay, what, like, are you maximizing what's already in front of you, or are you getting in your own way with regards to what's in front of you right now? So does that make sense as
The
far as like the
question,
discussion?
yes, the question makes sense. I'm not sure I have a lot of insights being able to look from inside the bottle.
Yeah, that's fine. So we can dive into that part. I just want to make sure we're on the same
I got you.
page as all that. Okay,
Yes, yes.
perfect. So what are you actually leading with when you're making these introductions or these pitches or, this networking?
So I'll start at a very broad level. How's your business doing? What's going on? What have you done recently that excites you? What challenges are really bothering you? Trying to get a holistic sense. I'd say over half the time, founders have a prompt already.
Mhm.
For example, we've gotten funding, we're going to scale, or we've been trying to grow sales for 2 years and it's just been very slow, etc. So then we'll start talking about that particular topic, but I will bring it back with a more holistic lens because I just want to make sure I'm not missing another aspect of the business. And so we'll have that conversation. I'll try to get a sense of what is going on, what's bothering them, what they've tried in the past, and maybe it worked, but for some reason they stopped doing, or what they've tried in the past and hasn't worked. And then you've probably seen this too. I learn a lot from the silences and trying to figure out what they're not talking about. And then
Mhm.
I might come back. So if they talk a lot about sales, but never about marketing, if the issue is revenue growth, or they talk a lot about hiring, but they don't talk about retention, right? So why is it you're doing all this hiring if you're like a 20-person company, right? So I'll try to figure out where the silences are and try to speak to those and figure out what's going on.
Perfect. So that's a beautiful discussion about your process and the nuances that you can pick up that obviously can only come from so many years of experience. So I guess my question would be, do you ever lead with, or how quickly do you make explicit that, like, I've led 5 companies to, mergers and acquisitions, exits, or, I helped them scale, like double their business for 3 years in a row, with my first one, etc. Like, how often do you lead with that?
So it's interesting in writing, I might include it, especially like in cold outreach, but in speaking, I don't. I mean, even you read the introduction, right? And if you hadn't, I probably wouldn't have said those words. Is probably a good answer.
Okay, fair enough. So why not?
It's interesting. In conversation, I tend to focus on what the other person needs and wants and try to figure that out.
Right. So it kind of now sounds like you're basically solving the problem before somebody's actually paid you to solve the problem.
That I think it because the problems are often complex and longer term. I think I'm starting to, yes, I'm starting to definitely trying to understand the problem. To be determined if I'm starting to fix it because the solutions can require lots of different things like somebody else or resources or software, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, I guess in the broad stroke, I am starting to solve the problem right away.
Right. So then do you think there's like, if you now paint that picture, so you're leading with what they need to do to solve the problem, you're not actually, not even tooting your own horn, but just like owning your own magnificence and like experience. And I'm a stranger that you've just met. So it's like suddenly you're telling me everything that's like essentially what's wrong. Like that could be taken one way. So right away, defenses and ego tends to get in the way. Or let's just say, even if that's not even there, if you're giving me everything for free and I don't know how great you actually are because you're not like I'm not going to go out of my way to find out how great you are. Now it's very easy for me to bypass and discount everything that you're saying because like, well, you just, yeah, okay, like that's cool. And then somebody else might, I don't know, hold some of that back or like just own like, hold on, are you ready to actually like, we should talk. Like I've doubled people's companies 3 years in a row, not and taken 5 to exit. What you're saying like sounds like an easy solution. I can help you with that. Even if you guys offer the exact same thing and somebody's leading with that, like who do you think the other party who circumstantially is now in a fear state because the market is what it is, they're looking for certainty and safety from whoever they're going to work with. But if you're leading with, here's the magic trick, this is how it's done, they're not really going to trust you. So what's landing with all of this?
So the part about talking about outcomes versus process, that makes a lot of sense. I can see from the listener's point of view, in the moment, they might be interested to talk about their problems, but as they sort of replay our discussion, it might be better to ground them in what I've done and solutions versus their particular problem, because their problem is going to evolve anyway, right? The problem this week is very likely to change for next week, for better or worse. So that part makes sense. So then bringing that into the discussion with holding the piece, talking about how the process could be, and instead sticking to solutions that have been done. I'm sort of thinking it through as I'm talking, so if
Yeah,
my words are a little choppy, that's why.
yeah, no, that's totally fine. So what's coming up for you as you're talking through this?
So I think it makes sense. It's something that I don't normally do, so it's hard to weigh it and say, "Oh, like that makes a lot of sense. That would definitely work." I think I'm definitely an introvert, and one thing I've noticed about myself is I tend to process both in the moment, but definitely after the moment. So something I will take away from this and think about is when people approach me, am I more engaged if they're talking about the challenges I have or the solutions they can bring, you know?
Correct. And I think the part that I'm really inviting you to consider, it's like, and these aren't, red flags is the wrong word to say, but let's just say like yield signs. So like when
Mhm.
you're saying, so I have people pleasing patterns. I tend to be an introvert. I tend to not go for the sale. So there's nothing inherently wrong about any of those things. Like you said, there's a lot of gifts in like you're service oriented. So that's why you do a really good job for people. Okay. Well, the distortion of that is I tend to people please and optimize usually subconsciously for like being liked as opposed to, being effective or moving towards decision because there's a threat there to not be liked. Okay. So when I hear clients talk about this and they're talking about them in this way, then these are all yield sides to me to like, okay, where are your blind spots with regards to how you're showing up that might be creating the lack of results that you're experiencing? Because right now, the part that I'm not hearing is like, you are this veteran who's been in the trenches. Like this isn't your first like downturn that you've had to navigate, with companies. You've done a lot of amazing things, but at least the way that you're describing how you're approaching that, there's a level of meekness that doesn't reflect or doesn't need to reflect your level of experience. Like you got all these expertise. It really should be, or what I would, I guess, envision from somebody with your level of experience. It's like, hey, I don't necessarily have to be like I'm bragging about myself, but it comes down to like, hey, okay, that's interesting. I've seen this many times before. I've done it in this way for like this and this company. This is definitely something that like I can help you with. Like, are you interested? Like you're not like it doesn't sound to me like you're meeting them actually where they're at. You're jumping to what your expertise is, which is like, all the things you would do once they've already paid you. And there's that whole middle ground where, there's a little bit of your patterns getting in the way, and there's a little bit of just, I've not practiced at this because business has always come my way. So this is now different. So there's like a bit of a skill gap, and there's a bit of like a leadership gap in how you're showing up. So anyway, I know that was a lot. What's landing for you? What is it?
No, I like that shift in both mindset and then the presentation that would come with it of this is what I've seen before. This is what I can do for you. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. That's true. I don't typically say those words. It's probably in my head, I guess I should say it's implied. But
Yeah,
it's
and
slow to
that's
get there.
so sorry to cut you off, but I think that's a big thing. It's generally not going to be implied, right? Like if
Right.
you think about founders, they're getting pitched for stuff all the time. You're just another like random like person that's coming in to approach them and like tell them something on how they should like run their business, right? So the fact like, and I've ever heard, and I know I'm butchering the quote, but like the idea that the biggest folly of like communications is both people think they've communicated. Like that's kind of the idea. Like what I think is obvious and blatant and implicit actually isn't. So now like you're talking blue, they're talking red, and you're like, well, why don't we see eye to eye? I think that's a big thing, because you need to like, if the circumstances that you're working in right now are ones that there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, then your job is to bridge the gap first by meeting them where they're at, creating a sense of safety, creating a sense of like, I can be the anchor for your certainty. Are you interested in coming along? Yes, great. Then it's getting buy-in that they're actually committed, which is generally financial. Then really you get to what you're good at. Right. So
Right.
there's this whole safety building bridge that I think you're skipping over, because there's a part of you that's like, well, I need to be liked, so I don't want to be too forward. So let me just stick to what I'm good at. And then, like I said, the skill gap of just what's the best way to approach building that bridge.
Now that makes a lot of sense. And that bridge, to use that word, which I like, would hopefully take me from what I'm good at to being able to work with new founders, right? It says, this is what I've done. These are the solutions I can provide. Let's get this activated and see how I can help you versus, talking about a one-off, what could be a one-off problem. And like you said, in their mind, that's one of 100 problems instead of holistically, like, how can I help them to solve a handful of problems so they can focus on other opportunities?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, now that's going to be context dependent, who it is that you're speaking to. But I think just the real big invitation here is like, step up with the confidence that like, I've been here before, I've seen this thousands of times, I got you, we can handle this together. You're better off with me by your side than you doing it by yourself. Like that's kind of the more of the energy that needs to be in there when you're approaching these situations, um which is going to be very jarring to the people pleasing part of you, right? Because it can be polarizing to show up in that way in some ways, right? And I'm
Right.
not saying you have to do it how I do it, by no means. I wouldn't recommend that. It's just more like you got to find and discover your own empowerment and confidence in that, and clear up the people pleasing part of you that is basically going to resist that. So what lands for you there?
No, it's interesting. As you were saying that, I was thinking about how a lot of times, as I'm like, the initial impression is like, okay, here's this guy, he's doing his thing. I feel like over time, and in business, it's typically 3 months, people are like, oh, like this guy has a lot of value, a lot of things to offer. And now I wonder if that's because I'm so focused on listening and people pleasing and creating a process that it's lacking the context of this is the solution we're working towards. This is how we're going to figure this out. This is how your life is going to be better. Like I often don't say those things because I'm so busy in the process. But in fact, to your point earlier, I think that would be more reassuring. Even though for me, I'm hesitant to commit to a solution while I'm in the process. In fact, it will bring about a better solution if people feel a sense of confidence. Even if some of the specifics change, the idea of things are going to be better after working with Benjamin is going to kind of create the solution as much as like my fancy ideas.
Right. So do you see how like in your head, you're seeing all of the steps that are required. You're seeing where it can go. You're seeing the big picture, but you're expressing 10% of what you actually see in your head.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So now flip that around. If I'm a founder and I'm paying you and you're expressing, so that's the only thing that I can actually see, 10% of the actual work you're doing, how do you think I'm going to feel about your actual output if I'm unaware of 90% of what you're actually doing?
Right. Yes. I know it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but yes, I'm going to feel at best you'll get 10% of it right. And that's if everything I'm doing that I expressed makes sense. But meanwhile, the rest is off the table because I haven't even brought it up. And like you said earlier, founders completely distracted thinking about lots of other things. They're not going to reflect on what I've could have done theoretically without me sort of making it explicit.
Correct. Because
Yeah.
in your mind, right, these and listen, like these the people pleasing aspects are always subconscious, right? So when I say you or like I'm using that, like generally I just mean your brain, right? So like your brain is essentially optimizing for you not to share the 90% that's actually going on in your head until you are almost absolutely sure that what you share is actually like correct, it's verifiable, all the details are there, it's correct. So you are basically optimizing to not be wrong, to be liked, to be accepted, versus creating a sense of safety, communication, camaraderie, and like we're in this together type of thing, and I got you by sharing everything, even of which some is going to shift over time, it's going to change, it's going to lead to disagreement, it's going to lead to polarization. And even though that mishmash of things seems messy, over time it actually creates a stronger bond and connection because it's like, okay, well, this person's in with me. I can see the things that they're doing. They're always in communication. Like I actually feel more certain and better because you're sharing all those things with me. So what lands for you with all of that?
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost a form of vulnerability to talk about what where you want to go, but also admit you're not quite sure how to get there. You're not quite sure it's going to be that exact specification. And then if I take what you say and apply it to a different context, there's one client that I've been working with for 4 years, and as an introvert, I finally feel very comfortable with everybody there. And in fact, we had a retreat, and I painted a picture of the future that was very clear about this is what I'd like to see us do. This is how I'd like to see us, treat the clients and grow the business. And people, I think, responded to that. Maybe they didn't fully agree, but like you said, but at least it was clear where I was going. And so that tells me I know I can get there. But what I need to do is bring that back all the way to my initial engagement. So instead of waiting 4 years to paint that picture, which most people are not going to patiently just, wait for, instead it's like, okay, let me be very clear from the beginning of what I would like to see, even if it's not that 100%, people pleasing, introverted comfort level. I got to put myself out there a little bit for them to respond to me as a person and build that relationship.
Yes, I think that is pretty much the linchpin example of what it is that we're kind of working through here. It's like it took me 4 years to basically express everything that's been going on in my head with regards to this client, right? Like, do you see how big of a gap of missed potential, like missed opportunities there exists in just that statement alone, right? Like you, and again, you, when I say you, your brain being so guarded with regards to what you do and you don't share, as with all people, please, like you're always internally optimizing, not for being effective. And this is not a competency thing. It's like, it's how is my competency perceived, right?
Mhm.
Your brain is always optimizing for essentially being liked, being accepted, being approved, never being wrong. And that leaves a lot of missed opportunities that live in the gray area, right? So you haven't had to experience them as viscerally and as in your face before, because circumstances were such that, you know, you had these great relationships and they kind of overpowered this. But now that circumstances have changed and you have to go into cold, where you basically, like, nobody likes and trusts you right off the bat because they just don't know you.
Right.
Now all of that is being basically squeezed out. And it's like, okay, well, this doesn't fit anymore in the world that you're inhabiting right now, which is why there's this like big gap of opportunities that you're missing, because all of these patterns are optimizing for something that doesn't really have a time and a place in these types of environments.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it what resonated the most was around in relationships where you can be uncertain, be vulnerable, then most most people, most humans respond to that because we're all like that at some level, and definitely in some areas. We might be highly competent here, but not so competent over here, and definitely not sure over there. And we all as adults kind of know that there are areas. So to say, like, okay, I've talked to you for a few minutes, based on what I'm hearing, this is what I can provide, and this is how I could be helpful. Does that resonate with you? Is much better than me asking 10 more questions, because at some point they can be like, oh, these questions are exhausting.
Correct. Yeah. Like on a tactical basis, yes, that's 110% it. And then yeah, there's also the deeper basis, which is really, it's like the basic working on the confidence with which you approach all of these situations, right? Like I know you keep repeating that you're an introvert. So the actual official like kind of concept or definition of introvert is just like, how do you get your energy? So like introverts generally tend to get their energy from not being around people, whereas extroverts get energized by being around people. That is still true. And over time, these definitions have kind of morphed into, well, I tend to just like essentially shrink myself in some ways, or kind of play it close to the edge, and not be loud and boisterous if I'm an introvert, versus, well, I have like all this personality and like, you know, like I'm loud and everybody loves me, and like whatever, as far as like attention is concerned. But the reality is those actual things that we associate with introversion, generally they tend to be some sort of protection mechanisms on like how we can play smaller. Because if we play smaller, we stay very safe, right? And that's what I was getting at with regards to like, we always stay correct, you always stay proper, you don't polarize, you don't voice a lot of things, you don't stick your neck out. We've said that to mean introversion, but it's really the inaccurate definition of it. Technically, there generally tend to be ways which our subconscious finds to like stay safe. And if we play small, then that's where I was getting at. Like, that's the gap between, you know, this label and really your confidence to own how good you actually are. Right. Like, it's pretty impressive. Like, if I knew nothing about you other than you took 5 companies to exit, like that's pretty impressive, you know?
Right.
So that's the gap, right? Like, I'm trying to play small because of these subconscious patterns, but my actual competency is all the way up here. And that's the gap why people aren't being like, oh, please, like I want to talk more to you. or with you. So again, what lands with all of that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think there's what I'll call a Venn diagram or overlap. So there is the introversion and there is the people pleasing. And I consider myself to be a servant leader, which might follow those two or might precede those two. It's hard to say, but those three are all kind of in combination. And it puts me in this place that on the one hand can be valuable in certain circumstances, reflective, thoughtful, creative in solving problems. But on the other hand, can be detrimental when people are looking for safety, security, clarity, and then what we've talked about here is the vulnerability of like, okay, this is what I know, but this is what I don't know, and I'm pretty sure we can find a way through this. It's not that I'm not confident or optimistic, but I'm uncertain, the path, or I am uncertain the destination, and I am hesitant to say those things. I think if I embrace that a little bit more, it's like when I went, to that client where I've been there for a while. It's not that I can sort of falsely recreate that confidence of knowing who I'm with and knowing that I have a safe space, but I can take from that, okay, like I gave clear direction. I gave, this is what I've seen, and therefore this is how it translates into possibilities for us. This is my version of the future. Let me share it with you. And then you come back and tell me what you think. I can take those components into meeting someone new and say, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm sure of. This is where I'm a little less certain. And this is where I think we can go, but let's figure it out together. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great summary of the tactical aspects of everything that we have talked about. And I just want to add a bit of nuance to everything that you voiced as well. It's like, yes, there's a lot of beautiful qualities in everything that we've described so far. What the gap that I'm describing for you is like when those gifts of yours end up being distorted, and it becomes like a man with a hammer problem, right? It's like the man with the hammer problem is like, okay, it has this one tool, but it's like not everything's a nail. So like sometimes you need a screwdriver. And often, I've said this on the podcast many times, it's like our primary strengths become our first distortions. So in your instance, the qualities that make you really good at the listening, the discerning, the taking in the information, you process it on your own, you spit out, an answer, and it's a well thought out answer, and all of those things. That's all good and beautiful. And it gets distorted when it gets combined with these people pleasing tendencies, where basically the external perception of it is like you shrink when you actually need to like blossom. Like that. It's not about like change yourself and like don't be who you are. Not at all. It's be more of that and learn which parts just need to be adjusted so that they don't work against you in these other contexts. So like, does that make sense for you?
I think so. I'm grounded in the man with the hammer analogy. And I think what I need to be doing is saying, I can help you build houses and build second floors and third floors instead of like, well, tell me about the house right now and ask a lot of questions, or let me show you my hammer. Instead, it's like focus on the bigger picture and with confidence, knowing that certainly haven't helped every company I've talked to, but I've helped with a number of companies get to a better place and feel that confidence of like what's worked well and offering that much sooner than I tend to do.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, it's a great way to take the same analogy and actually apply it in a different way. So I love it. And I think it's a beautiful expression of it. So yeah, I think that, at least from my end, as far as like mapping out, where you are and kind of what's standing in your own way, I think that that's pretty much it. Like, is there anything that's outstanding for you or something that feels incomplete for you?
I've gained so much here. I'm feeling good. It's going to take a while to process through everything I learned, but that's not to say I won't try applying it pretty quickly. I have one or two calls this week, and I'm going to rewrite some of my notes and see if I can shift in that direction and then see how it feels. So, no, I'm good for now. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Beautiful. You're very welcome. So yeah, in that case, just floor is yours to close us off. Let everybody know where to find you, who's the best person to find you. Floor is yours for that.
Thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying that I've helped lots of companies to scale and grow. It's a bit of a joke, but also it's also true. I can be found at www.webuildscalegrow.com. That's the business website. I post often on LinkedIn under my name, Benjamin Friedman, and I have a book out there, Scale, Reach Your Peak. It comes in at 500 pages, but it's actually broken out where it's very modular. It covers over 130 topics holistically, scaling your business, everything from sales and marketing to finance, business operations, as well as leadership and growth. So you can find a topic you're interested in, read about it for 5 to 7 minutes, and then put it away until you need it again.
Beautiful. Love it. Well, Benjamin, thank you very much for being on and allowing yourself to be witnessed in this way. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Drasco. Appreciate it.